Welcome to the Leading Together podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Joe Olwig, and this week we're honored to have Mike Grossman with us. Over the past 30 years, Mike's been the CEO of 6 early-stage venture-funded Silicon Valley companies, all of which were ultimately acquired. His latest adventure has been to write a book about these experiences titled Failure is an Option: Reflections of a Silicon Valley CEO. It provides a window into what it's really like to run an entrepreneurial technology company, practically, ethically, and emotionally. Mike, we're so happy to have you today. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so Mike, maybe we'll just start by, we'd love to know what's bringing you joy lately. Maybe it's a book, a show, a new friend, habit.
Probably my kids, grown kids. One of them is about to turn 30. He's on a pretty interesting adventure where he pivoted his career from film to basketball and is involved as a basketball coach. And he's on the verge of moving to Brisbane, Australia, where he's going to be an assistant coach for the Brisbane Bullets, which is the
Wow.
franchise in the National Basketball League in Australia. And then our daughter is it's almost the inverse. She's an athlete who's trying to recover from surgery in order to play soccer professionally in Australia.
Oh, wow.
But this week she's shadowing the cinematographer and on the set of Shrinking, and has been
Really?
just really enjoying that a lot. So yeah, I'm sort of vicariously enjoying watching their adventures.
Those are, man, I think Joe and I are probably both thinking like, I hope our kids are having adventures that grand that we can follow along with them when they're your age. I think, Joe, you've watched Shrinking, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we both love that show. The daughter goes to play soccer. Is that the connection, or what's the connection there?
That's the connection. A year ago, my daughter had the opportunity to effectively be a stunt person, where she was the goalkeeper who got scored on in an episode of season 3.
Okay.
And it was through that she met a bunch of people involved with the show. And what she's really interested in is being in the film industry, and being behind the camera as opposed to in front. And so that's what led to this week. Yeah.
Wow. Is she an actual goalie as well? Is that what position she
is? Yeah.
Okay.
Which also helps explain the injury, which led to the surgery that she's trying to recover from, because it's kind of a tough position. But yeah, she was a goalkeeper for USC, University of Southern California, and graduated about a year ago now, and is trying to pursue a dual career that combines sports on the one hand with film on the other.
Living the dream. That's incredible. I'm a big soccer fan myself. The soccer team that I support had a good week. So I'm an Arsenal fan.
I was guessing, based on that description.
Big week this week, but that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Good luck to your daughter.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, Mike, when we got a chance to chat before the pod here, one of the things that you shared that I was really intrigued by, that I think our audience would love to hear more about, is you made this distinction between cultural identity and strategic identity, which immediately brought some of ideas for me. I know what that means to me, but I wanted to hear, you have so many great experiences. I wanted to learn more about what that meant for you, and just give our audience a chance to tap into kind of what you learned and what those differences mean to you.
I think for me, strategic identity is what the company does, and cultural identity is who the company is. So in some sense, if you imagine the group of people in the company almost as a person, what would their attributes be? What would their personality be? How would they do things? And to me, that's the distinction between the two.
Okay. And when you think about, I'm curious, like from a outputs perspective and getting started, like in clarifying and driving alignment in these two different things, like how do you do that? Like how do you do that, and what are you driving towards in helping, teams, especially as you're growing an organization? That might be easier between a couple of founders, but as you're growing people and trying to bring alignment on cultural identity and strategic identity, what have you seen to work there?
I think you have to be explicit and articulating what it is you're trying to do or it is you're trying to be. So
Mhm.
on the strategic identity side, I've always been a real fan of explicitly articulating what your key objectives are
Mm.
and
Mm.
breaking that down into specific goals and metrics that define success and managing the company in that very specific way. And somewhat similarly, every company has a culture, but I
Mhm.
think that there's real benefit in defining what that culture is as opposed to it just existing on an ad hoc basis. So I'm a fan of articulating a set of values and then managing to those values, measuring how well the company exemplifies or doesn't exemplify, excuse me, what those values, how well the company is living those values.
Mm. Mike, on the strategic identity side of things, how often are you and your team sort of evolving the answers to some of those questions? Talk to us about the cadences and the frequency of evolving that, deepening that, pivoting. Yeah.
Yeah, my personal bias has always been to have a quarterly objectives process where each quarter you're defining the next 3 months as well as the next year.
Hmm.
And during that quarter, on a monthly or at least twice during that quarter basis, you're evaluating how you're doing in terms of tracking to the specific objectives and goals and tactics and metrics that you've defined. So
Mm.
I've come to favor a very process oriented approach, which is kind of funny because when I started in my career as an entrepreneur and CEO, I actually rejected bureaucracy and process and had a very negative view of it. But what I found is as companies start to scale, if you don't have real intention and around these issues and create a framework, that chaos very quickly intrudes.
Hmm.
People have a shared understanding of why they're working on what they're working on or what they should be working on, and it ends up really hindering a company's ability to grow. So 30 years on, I actually believe that having a very specific framework based approach is vital.
Yeah. You in your book, you mentioned the idea that effort doesn't always result in the outcomes that you're after.
Right.
And, when I read through some of that, I thought about process. And you talked earlier about sports. Oftentimes in sports, it's, you hear a post game interview from a player or a coach these days, and it's all about the process, right? They're just constantly, it's about the process. Well, we had our process, we stuck to our process, we trusted the process.
Yeah.
I was getting some of those vibes in reading your book. Is that am I on the right track here? Or tell us a little bit about how you think about that and what you mean by that idea.
I do think in a very similar way. What I found is that there's this idea when you're younger that input yields output. So if you're a
Yeah.
student, for example, and you study hard, then you tend to do relatively well. And if you're not doing as well as you want, well, then you have to study harder. But what I found is in the world of entrepreneurship is that just because you're working hard doesn't mean that you're going to have a good outcome. And in some fundamental sense, you can't control the outcome. There's too many things that exist in the world, whether it's
Mhm.
competition or macroeconomic events or things that you didn't properly anticipate because there really was no way to anticipate, that ends up defining what the outcome is. And it's just not controllable. What you can control is the effort you put in, the approach you take, the process as you're
Mhm.
describing it. And so it's much more productive to focus all of your energy on that and try not to worry about the outcome, which is really hard to do. I mean, the reality is that we're in an outcome based context almost continuously. To really try to put that out of your mind is almost impossible. But I found that it ends up being a much better approach to try not to think about that, to
Mhm.
just focus on doing trying to do things well, and the process, is a that you've defined kind of defines what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mike, one of the things that came to mind for me when you mentioned this idea of strategic identity, we have a framework that we walk clients through, and just to clarify their identity, sort of the beginning of a process of building a high performing executive team. And one concept that we introduce is this, we call it a theory of impact. And it basically just means, we have a mission, an overarching objective that we're working towards, but then we've got like a strong point of view on the unique way in which we accomplish that mission. Right. And in many ways, you could think of it as, it's akin or at least adjacent to like a hedgehog theory or, a niche. Um, and it's meant to be like sort of like the beginning of strategy because it's starting to just bring some shape, and ideally inform the more near term goal and priority setting process by like we've got this theory that's unique about how we accomplish our ultimate objective. I'm kind of curious because you've been in such like so many different companies that have grown and pivoted. To what degree do you view that as an important exercise versus being more open to letting the process then shape what that unique theory is for how you're ultimately achieving your objectives?
I'm not sure I understand the question exactly, but I guess my thought is that you have to listen to the universe in some sense
Yeah.
in terms of where the opportunities are most interesting and appealing. But I think you also have to make some decisions about where you're going to focus. You can't do everything.
Right.
So I think there's this dynamic where you're soliciting feedback from employees, from customers, from prospective customers, from the market, and but at the same time, you have to create hypotheses of where you can go and where you can be most successful, given the strengths and weaknesses of your company and your organization.
Yep.
And those are the bets you place, and they may be
Right.
calculated bets, but they're bets nonetheless. And sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't work.
Yeah.
But I think having a specific idea of the case is important.
Yeah. Well, one other thing you mentioned in your book is the importance of not just articulating values, but actually working to bring them to life in culture.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think you even shared, I can't remember if it was our previous conversation or in the book, but like even evaluating whether those values are operationalized. And
Yeah.
so we'd just love to hear your thoughts on just broadly, how have you, where have you, what have you done to successfully bring values to life in the companies you've led?
Yeah, there have been three key priorities, all of which starts with articulating a set of organizational values that are important to me, but also important to the larger team. And but once those are defined, there's a danger that if you don't try to operationalize them, they end up being just rhetoric. You put them up on a wall, and people don't think that they actually mean anything. So the first piece is having those values be a key part of the hiring process.
Hmm.
You're looking for somebody in the sales function or the marketing function or engineering function, and not just focusing on the people's backgrounds or how good they are in a substantive way, but also how well they align with the company values. And if they don't align well with the company values, you actually don't hire them. That's the
Mhm.
first. The second is in the review process, employee review process. In a similar vein, you don't just look at the substantive job they did, but you look at how well they functioned in alignment with the values you've articulated. And if, for example, they have done a good job in many ways, but they're kind of toxic, then they don't have such a great performance review. But you tie it back very specifically to the values, as opposed to it being kind of more general than that. And then the
Hmm.
third very critical piece is that you survey the organization frequently, so typically on a quarterly basis, as to how well the company, in the view of the employees, is exemplifying the values or not,
Mm.
and then you report out on that to the entire company. And you say,
Yeah.
This is the area where people feel we're doing well. This is the area where people feel we're not doing well. And here's the action plan to address the things that we're not doing as well." And
Yeah.
over time, over the quarters, over the years, you see this really interesting ebb and flow in terms of how well the company is is doing or not doing with respect to values, and you'll see things strengthen and you'll see things weaken, but you have a very good sense of uh, where you are relative to the cultural
Mhm.
framework that you've defined. And
Mm.
it's not an ad hoc process the way I think it is in most companies.
Yeah. Do you have any stories on, when some of those results came back and you saw a value that wasn't, where you hoped it would be in the opinion of the employees to how you responded or something that you did that helped work to activate it a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, a good example in a couple of companies that I've run, there's been two different values that are intentionally in tension with one another. One of them being relentless velocity, and
Mm,
another being analytical rigor. And
mm,
so
mm.
they're inherently in conflict because if you go really fast, you don't have time to analyze. And if you analyze a lot, you often don't go fast. But I
Right.
think great companies often find a really good balance between the two, and which
Mhm.
is the reason why I think it's an interesting, they're interesting from a values perspective. So yeah, I've been in situations in the companies where the prevailing view is that the company is moving too slowly or moving too fast,
Yeah.
and then you have to figure out, well, why is that, and you have to deconstruct it and survey people on the team and figure out if there's maybe excessive bureaucracy is slowing things down or a reluctance to take risk,
Mm.
and you have to try to address it, and then you come back again the next quarter and see if people think you've done a good job of that or not. So it
Yeah.
ends up being very dynamic because you're trying to manage it in an explicit and very action oriented way. Of course, these things aren't easy to change because often people's personalities and group personalities are fairly hardwired.
Mhm.
But I think you have a better chance of adapting if you're talking about it and if you're making it explicit as opposed to just sort of observing it and letting it happen.
Would do you th there's an interesting thing that you just shared about those 2 values being opposing that I'm curious about. I don't wanna assume, but it sounds like you liked the l flushing out and exploring the tension between those 2 values and that ultimately would drive some growth for both thinking and performance for the organization. Is that like, did you I mean, one view of that would be like these values are too much at odds. We should not adopt both of them because that will
Mm.
create confusion in culture. But I'm hearing you say that you appreciated that tension. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I have a bias which informs my view there in terms of those values, but I'm of the view that great companies go consistently fast in a thoughtful way.
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and that means that they analyze on the one hand, and they also put a lot of emphasis on velocity on the other hand. So I just think it's interesting when you deconstruct and I've seen this throughout my career, is that people usually fall on one side of that or the other. They're more comfortable analyzing or they're more comfortable going fast.
Yeah.
And I think of it as a seesaw in a kind of visual sense where
Mhm.
my job as a CEO is often to push on one side of the seesaw or the other. If an organization tends to move too slowly because they
Mm,
overanalyze, well, maybe push on the side of the seesaw where they're moving faster. If they tend to analyze too little, they shoot before aiming. Well, then you try to push on the side of the seesaw which emphasizes analysis. So it has some complexity, I suppose, but I think the question is, how do you build something great?
mhm,
Mhm.
And I don't see how to have a great organization if you don't have a balance between those two issues, for example. So I
Mhm.
think you have to talk about them, and I think you have to embrace that tension on a group scale, but also on an individual scale. So when you're talking to somebody who might be the head of sales or an engineer on the team, it's very useful to have a almost ruthlessly honest view of where people are in terms of that type of dynamic. And I think it's important for
mhm,
people on the team to have that type of self awareness as well, because they
mhm.
can kind of realize the trade offs that they're making.
Yeah. Mike, maybe to continue on that line that you shared about what it takes to really build a really strong, high performing organization. Uh, we're believers that one of the number one drivers of organizational health and performance is the overall effectiveness and sort of cohesion of that top leadership team, that executive team. You've led many executive teams. I'd be interested to know when you think back on maybe some of the teams that you led that were most effective, most cohesive. What were some of those key ingredients or attributes of those teams that were so impactful?
Yeah. I mean, the first is that you need people in each functional area who's really strong substantively.
Yeah.
So whoever's running engineering, whoever is running human resources, marketing, they need to be really good
Yeah.
in their functional specialty. But the second is it works best when people care more about how the team does
Yeah.
than how they're doing individually. It's the team
Mm,
first type of mentality, which is also a good analogy to sports. But
Mm.
I think it's really true. It's there. That's the best group of people to work with, where they're trying to figure out how to make the entire organization do as well as possible. And the third is people who are, I would say, highly collaborative, but also are able to disagree with one another in
Mm.
a
mm.
constructive, polite, but nonetheless direct way, so that you can actually hash out issues with an eye to yielding the best possible outcome. So all of those dimensions are the things that I've seen tend to be best, and when you have a really great team.
Yeah. I think for our audience, it's really helpful to hear the combination of the first two, especially sort of this, I'm going to rely on you to be world class in your functional area. Like the business needs that. We need your leadership there. We need your expertise there. And I'm going to expect you to show up to this executive team with a team first, executive team first mindset, thinking about the full organization, right? And what are our objectives at the organizational level, and be able to, there's another tension point, right? And, just talked about pace with analytics. I hear this, you sort of leaning into that tension point as well, and pushing the teams that you led to embrace both, right? It's not one or the other. I don't just need you to be successful over in your functional area. I need you to bring this team first approach as well.
Yes, and it's interesting where I've seen the most tension around that is in the sales function. I
Oh,
think in a lot of organizations, the view is sales is a different animal, and you're trying to hire people who are killers in some sense and are very
yeah,
materially focused, and just let them go, even though that's going to cause strain with the rest of the organization while
Yeah.
they hustle to make money. And I've actually found that the best sales organizations have people who, on the one hand, are materially driven, but on the other hand, actually care about the overall group and think of
Mm,
themselves as a part of something larger than themselves.
mhm,
And so I think it extends to every business function, and at least it has in my experience.
yeah. I'd love to hear any stories or anything that you did that helped to nurture that third one that you shared, this sort of high degree of collaboration, but also this willingness to disagree and sort of have what I was hearing, maybe some, just difficult, tense conversations, maybe conflict conversations. Yeah.
so yeah, it sounds like healthy conflict as a strong capability is what you're saying, right, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I almost don't think of it as conflict when it's really healthy. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
people sort of expressing their perspective on what they think should be done and why,
Hmm.
and personalizing it. It's just trying to work the problem, figure out what is it that we should do based on the data, and try not to get emotionally involved in that analysis. Try to listen to other people and try to really explore things. How to facilitate that, it depends on who you hire. You're looking for people who are able to have those types of discussions without it becoming a competitive screaming match or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's when people, in some level, don't behave in a constructive way when you're having those discussions. It's calling that out quickly or addressing it quickly,
Hmm.
and ultimately having very little tolerance for it. That's been my experience. I personally would not like to be in an environment where people were at each other's throats.
Hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so if when you see that, it's you deal with it.
Yeah.
Uh, look, there are many different ways to build companies. And
Mhm.
you can see that different companies reflect different personalities of the people who started them, who are running them. So to a great extent, my preferred approach, which is very values based, very constructive, very collaborative, et cetera, is a reflection of what I think is important. And I do believe that you can build a really great, high performing organization taking that approach. I don't think it's the only way, though. It's just that's the only way that would work for me. And I think there are a lot of people like me who are also very values driven,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and for whom for which that resonates as an approach. But I
Yeah.
don't think it's the only way. I mean, there's a lot of examples of companies that are run very differently than that.
Yeah. Well, Mike,
Yeah.
I can, and just in the past half an hour, I can get a sense of what it might feel like to be in that space as an executive team member on your team and the values driven approach you take. And just you earlier said work the problem. Like I can just see you sort of messaging to the team, let's just work the problem. Like let's step out of it. Let's, look at it objectively, and through the way that you're showing up, bringing those values into it, creating the conditions inside of that team where it feels there's a sense of comfort and safety in that, hey, we're looking objectively at this, this problem, and we're going to work it. We're going to
Yeah,
work
and
solution.
I would extend on that
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people get upset when problems emerge.
Hmm.
They get ruffled and they create stress. But my view is that that's the essence of business. What is business? Business is just problem solving, and
Hmm.
some of those problems emerge unexpectedly
Hmm.
and have to be dealt with urgently. Often problems are not unexpected at all. They're things that you can anticipate or even plan for, but all of it relates to problem solving. And so, consequently, my view is that when problems emerge, they're supposed to emerge. I mean, that's kind of what we do. And there's no sense in getting stressed out or upset about them. You just have to expect it. That's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
And so what's more important is how do you manage the problems when they inevitably occur, and try to stay calm and figure it out. And
Mm.
that's actually what's interesting about it, in my view, as well, is the problem solving is the point.
Yeah. That's great.
That that feels like a real
Hmm.
I love that reframe, Mike, because I think for a lot of leaders, they might see the problem as the distraction,
Hmm.
right? Like getting in the way of all the other things they are supposed to be doing, or maybe they have the most to offer. And I think a reframe of like saying like a really important essential part of what we are here to do is to solve problems, right, together.
Right.
So that I even just I hear some relief in that reframe, so that we don't have to view one of them as maybe tipping us over the edge of what we have the capacity to solve, but like more thinking about this is essential to what we're responsible for. So how do we build in and engineer time for it, and maybe change our perspective on that?
And so when it comes to building teams, I very much think in terms of this approach, which is I want to work with people who have a very matter of fact view about the problem solving nature of of
Hmm.
business and
Hmm.
entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
and they're very level headed about it. And yeah, so
Yeah.
that's
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 great.
that is how I view it. I also think at a different level of abstraction that business and entrepreneurship is just a metaphor for life, or it's a microcosm of life. Is probably a better way of saying it.
Hmm.
And that's what life is. I mean, you have good days, you have bad days, you have bad mornings and good afternoons, and things go up and down, and you're constantly dealing with little and big problems. That's just the nature of every day. And I think in this business is just like that, and you just gotta work on it.
Hmm. That's a that's a real healthy perspective. I love that. Mike, one of the things you mentioned in the book that really grabbed my attention was this idea of storytelling, and in particular, like storytelling, not just like as a communication skill, but I think you view it as something central to leadership and organizational alignment. And so I'd love to just hear more of your thoughts on that. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, I think that telling stories is kind of fundamental to the human experience. And we tell
Mm,
ourselves stories all the time, our lives in some sense, as we say, well, who are we or what have we been doing? All of that is, in the end, an exercise in storytelling. It contextualizes, who we are and what we're doing, and it applies certainly in a business environment as well, where you know, you're trying to figure out what the company is doing and why it's doing it, and what the aspirations are and what the goals are.
mm,
Well, all of that is in the end storytelling. I'm not
mm,
saying storytelling in a fictional sense. I mean, ideally, it's not fictional, especially in a business context. But nonetheless, it's explaining to people in a way that is hopefully understandable and coherent and ideally compelling what it is you're trying to do or what's going on or what the problem is, even the story around the problem. It makes sense of things that otherwise may be hard for people to understand or at least achieve some alignment around understanding. And then fundamentally, as a leader, if you want to convince anybody to do anything, stories are enormously valuable in explaining, what you're trying to do. So
mm,
so yeah, I think of, I mean, even this discussion we're having right now. I mean,
mhm,
all of this is around storytelling.
mhm,
It's what have we experienced and why, and why do we have a certain point of view, and how is that formed, and how does that get applied? Explaining all of that in the end is a kind of broad view of stories, I think, and storytelling, and I think it's important.
how might you I mean, that really resonates, and I'm curious. When we work with a number of leaders, and I think this is probably a prevailing, like, thought, regardless of who we've worked with or not, just that sometimes leaders, have a lot of anxiety about, like, leading an organization through a significant change,
Mm,
and I'm curious, like, the role, in your experience and things that you've been through of effective storytelling can help to bring people into, um, the change and maybe not only feel less anxiety, but just have more belief in it.
I think that when you're leading a group, it's important that the group have a shared understanding of what's happening and why things are being done. And I
Mhm,
think that sort of anxiety apart, I think it's just figuring out how do you get everybody sailing in the same direction. It depends on that sort of, shared understanding and telling stories, explaining to folks here kind of here's the situation, here's the story of the company effectively
mm,
is important in getting everybody moving in the same direction. But I do think that to the extent you can explain that in a way that makes sense to folks, it is reassuring. And that reassurance helps to reduce the amount of stress that people may be feeling because often the outcome is uncertain. Again, it's you're dealing with problems. The problems might have significant implications. If you get stuck worrying too much about what the implications are, it can be fairly destructive and can, affect people in a very negative way. So focusing on what the situation is and what you're going to do about it, I think can be very helpful in focusing the group on being constructive and you know devoted to what they can control as opposed to what's out of their control.
yeah. Mike, one of our storylines in our experience working with executive teams has been that when they can get a specific process right, which is sort of this combination of creating shared focus as a team and then adopting an operating rhythm in which they're coming together in a routine way to both honor that focus and check in on it, monitor it in meaningful ways, but also do the problem solving work, um, connect with each other. We sort of refer to that as an operating rhythm. And when they can really focus on that process and get that right, we're going to be more likely to yield the outcomes that we're after. You've led many executive teams. You've had many chances at probably working this and reworking this. You cover some of that in your book. Would love to hear just some of your lessons learned there and what you've seen maybe work well across many contexts.
I mean, I've tended to use a quarterly framework as I was mentioning before, but I think the most significant thing is being real about how well goals are being achieved or not being achieved.
Mm,
So one I mentioned in the book is if you've articulated an objective and a metric and you're on target, you can define that as green. But if you're not on target and looks like you're going to miss something, you're red. And what happens in a lot of organizations is people don't want to report out to the larger group that things are red. And
yeah.
so they end up kind of adjusting the rules. So something that should be red suddenly is yellow green, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
problems get sort of swept under the rug. And what I've found is that when you get the best sort of operating rhythm, it has an authentic quality to it, where
Yeah.
you call out the things that are not going as well
Mhm.
as opposed to glossing over them. And I think that's critically important because coming back to this issue that what we do is solve problems, if you're not going to actually talk about the problems, then you're kind of missing the point.
Yeah.
Mm, that's great,
To me,
Mike.
that's the biggest thing. But of course, you have to create a safe space
Yeah.
Right.
because a lot of
Right.
people have been socialized to not admit failure or weakness
Yeah.
or talk about problems in an open way. And so the reason that people will often gloss over that or sweep it under the rug is because they've been taught by life that they get penalized when they actually talk about the truth
Yeah.
when problems exist. So it's vital to model the behavior that says,
Mhm.
you're not going to get shot because you're saying there's a problem. It's in fact, if anything, you're going to be complimented because you're calling out the problem. And so I believe it's very important for a CEO and for leaders generally to take that view, which is you're not
Yeah.
going to get in trouble because something went wrong. If anything, you get in trouble for not talking about when something goes wrong. But
Yeah.
if you talk about it and we can then do something about it, that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great, Mike. We'll love that wisdom. One question that we ask to everybody that comes on the pod is to think about the best teammate you ever had. You don't have to name that person, but if you have that person in mind, what characteristics did they embody that made you think of them with this question?
Extremely smart, extremely good at their substantive area of expertise, very hardworking, very easy to work with, extremely collaborative,
Mm,
uh, and absolutely focused on the larger team, putting the
Mm,
team ahead of themselves often, and just care about everybody, and also very empathetic. I'll say,
mm,
as a human being, they care. They're kind. They can be
yeah.
tough, but they're kind fundamentally.
mm,
Yeah. I love that. Well, that's a great list. I'm gonna go back and listen to this and jot those down. Mike, when does the book come out? This is we'll air this one sometime in the future. We're definitely gonna try and align this with the release of
Oh,
your book. But when is the book
yeah,
officially out?
the book is called "Failure is an Option." It's out June 9th.
June
So
9th.
it's
Okay.
actually coming up pretty soon right now. Actually, just got the first physical copy. It was kind of a strange experience to open the box and see
wow.
that.
That's amazing. That's my anniversary. So good date. Good.
Ironically, it is my anniversary too.
Oh,
So
really?
my
Okay.
wife was and completely by accident as it happened. But yeah, bizarrely, my wife and I are celebrating this is 36 years
Oh
on
man,
that same day. So it is, but it
That's so
wasn't
great.
selected for that reason. So yeah.
Oh man,
great.
that's amazing. That's so great.
Congratulations. Yeah.
And where can people find it when it's out?
It's all the normal book sites, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, independent booksellers that are online, it'll be available on all of them. Available in multiple formats and kind of the old world physical format or ebook, Kindle type of format or audio.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I saw on LinkedIn that you finished the audio.
Well, I have finished recording the audio. Now we're
Okay.
knee deep in the editing of the audio, which is its own experience. But yeah, that's going to
Yes.
be finished shortly.
We learned that too, where some of the guidance we got was like, oh, it'll be fine to splice it all, and there was a couple funny splices.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
you don't often remember like the exact tone and things you were emphasizing, and when you like pick right up like a week later. And
Right.
so, so that was definitely a learning curve for us with
Yeah.
recording the audiobook. Um, well, and can people find you on LinkedIn, Mike, if they want to reach out to you?
They can.
Yeah,
Mike Grossman. I think it's M.I. Grossman is the LinkedIn name. So yeah, people should feel certainly comfortable and to reach out. I would enjoy that.
that's awesome. I follow Mike on LinkedIn. He's got some really great thoughts and content over there. So we definitely encourage anyone to follow Mike on LinkedIn. Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. This was just an awesome conversation. We're so grateful for your time.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, Sean. So Sean and Joe both. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for tuning into this episode of Leading Together. If you found it valuable, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps more leadership teams discover these conversations. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, or drop a comment with your thoughts. And you can always find more resources at sixlevers.co, including signing up for our newsletter, which we ship every Tuesday morning. Thanks so much.